We didn't need to record that portion. Okay, let me go to the share screen. Oh, don't stick again. I've lost you, haven't I?
We can hear you. You're
Yeah.
still here.
Can you see the cursor?
No, we can't.
No, it's not.
No. I realize that because I don't have the controls down at the bottom. Let me come in again. I'll come in as a student, however. Okay, there you are. Okay, this time I think I'll be fine. Okay, this time you're seeing the modules, right? They're spinning right now down to the bottom.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. Let me go back up. On September, September 23rd, the first item that is included on L2 was given in lecture, the digestive system. To indicate that for you, I will also send you an email that has these listed. But right now, you see I've indented it here. See this is indented, do you?
Yeah.
Okay, that means it's on the lecture test too. The recording has information for you, but it's the same information that was talked about on 923. You can certainly look at the recording. Come on down, here's the next indentation. The digestive system again. It was the second part of that lecture. It's the same page, same long page, but we did the second half of it. This is on L2. They're looking way back into September for a test in November. Then we did the urinary system, which is indented here, okay, in the lecture. There was a practice quiz on the digestive system in week 7. The practice quiz is a good place to find some study material or some answers. So it's indented. Come on down, we're going past the muscles now. The respiratory system is included. I gave you a list of heart structures. I gave it to you in more than one place. Those are included. Come down farther. I gave you a practice quiz on the urinary and respiratory systems. And that again has some good information in it. On Tuesday, we talked about circulatory system. That's included. A list of heart structures again. Okay, I said I duplicated that, so here it is. The heart PowerPoint that I did on Tuesday is included. It's indented. Okay, And then that's all the material, but there are some review terms for the second exam, indented, another practice quiz, indented, and another practice quiz that weren't there on Tuesday. I put them in there. The review terms are the terms from our list of terms that I talked about earlier, from the website under topics. And we start with mechanical digestion, go down, up and down, and we end up with plasma, which we did on Tuesday. Okay, so the indented items that I just showed you, okay, had terms in them, and these terms need to be understood. Okay, so if you understand these terms, you're not going to have to write a definition. You're going to have to pick one of the choices. And if you know what the term is and it's involved in the question, you should be able to get it right. These are the terms. You can see a lot of heart terms here. You can expect a diagram of the heart. The heart overlaps lecture and the lab. Show you where, see that? And down here, right here, this was Tuesday. And then there's a list of heart structures, and then it says lecture and lab. Okay. Both will draw questions from this. The heart PowerPoint, and also heart review should have been indented, so we do that. Okay. If you take a look at the ear, brain, and eye, which I've shown you, that won't be until P3. Okay. But at the end, tacked on is a bunch of images of the heart that are included elsewhere. And so nothing to worry about in there. Okay. Well, you're going to see it anyway because I've got it earmarked for today. Okay, so you understand that the indented material is all fair game for L2. Okay. Any questions?
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay. I'm going to skip this one since I've shown it to you for right now. I'm going to move down to fetal circulation because it's more in tune with what we've been talking about. Won't move down, move it up. There we go. Okay, fetal circulation is the circulatory system in the fetus as opposed to the newborn. Your book has a diagram very similar to this, depending upon the edition that you have. Okay. But you should be able to find it in your book, looking at the index and look up fetal circulation. Okay. On the left-hand side, this is the circulatory system of the fetus. And on the right-hand side is the circulatory system of the newborn. When they say newborn, they really might as well say adult, okay? Because after you're born, your circulatory system changes right at birth, but after that, no further changes are expected that are beneficial to you anyway. Okay. So we're going to start with the newborn. The exchange of oxygen and nutrients for the fetus developing in the mother takes place at the placenta. An umbilical cord brings blood and takes blood away from the placenta. Oxygenated blood, in dark red here, is picked up at the placenta and follows the central vessel, which is the umbilical vein. Yes, it's a vein because it's traveling towards the heart. That's our definition of vein. This is not an artery, even though it's carrying oxygenated blood. Veins sometimes carry oxygenated blood, and here's the best example. So it's going right through the center here. And the blood is coming first to the liver, almost like it does in the hepatic portal system coming from the small intestine in the adult. Okay, but really, the liver is too small. The liver is too small to detoxify the blood coming in. It's not ready. It's not developed enough yet. In fact, if the mother should take a medication that's harmful, whether she knows it or not, we've had a lot of, in my lifetime, instances where medications have proven to cause birth defects, for instance, thalidomide, if you are old enough to remember that one. But the blood in the umbilical vein passes right through the liver. And this is what we call a shunt. I don't have that word on the screen. Shunt, S-H-U-N-T, is a shortcut. And the blood shortcuts right into the vena cava. The shortcut in the liver is referred to as the ductus venosus, the duct of the vein. Okay, nobody was very original on that one. Okay, here's the ductus venosus. And the blood that is oxygenated will mix with the less oxygenated blood that's circulating in the fetus, but it'll follow the same direction. It'll take the vena cava and go up to the right atrium. Here we are in the right atrium. Also receiving blood, the right atrium gets its share from the superior vena cava. Now, the blood that mixes here together in the right atrium is no longer as potent and oxygenated as it was in the umbilical vein because it has been diluted by the fetal blood in the vena cavas. But it's still going to be the most highly oxygenated chamber because the oxygenated blood that went through the ductus venosus going through the liver went right to the vena cava and right up into the right atrium. Okay, now there's two ways that the blood can leave the right atrium. In the adult heart, that's not the case. What we looked at last time was that from the right atrium, the blood enters the right ventricle going through the tricuspid valve right here. Some of the blood does indeed go right into the right ventricle. Okay? That's sort of the same. When the right ventricle contracts, it pushes the blood through the pulmonary semilunar valves, as small as they are, through the pulmonary trunk, but instead of shunting the blood all off to the lungs here and here, only a small amount of blood goes to the lungs. The majority goes through this larger shunt, a shortcut that doesn't exist in you and I as adults. This shunt takes the blood from the pulmonary trunk straight into the lower portion of the aortic arch. There's the aorta behind it. It goes right in. That shunt is called the ductus arteriosus, the artery duct. Again, not much imagination in naming that one. What's happening here is that we're more or less, not completely, but more or less bypassing the lungs. The lungs have to have their own share of oxygen to survive, of course, but they don't need a fuller, bigger share to feed the rest of the body. That's coming from the mother and the placenta. So now we're going to bypass the pulmonary arteries, that's this one and this one, and go with the ductus arteriosus into the vena cava. Now, I said vena cava, that's not right. It's into the aorta. The aorta has blood in it that's coming over and down. It's going to force all this blood down into the lower part of the body. Okay. So blood that comes from the right atrium, right ventricle, takes the shunt across, is then directed to the lower portion of the body. Okay. The other thing that can happen, get back to the right atrium, there's another way out, not just through the tricuspid valve. There is a small opening right here. I think somebody could have been a little bit more artistic here, but it's an opening that punches through to the left atrium. This arrow is going through and coming out here. This hole in the heart is called the foramen ovale. We know the word foramen means hole or passageway. Okay. And it's also oval. We've had the term foramen ovale in the skull. Okay. Here's the foramen ovale. And the blood passes across. It doesn't take the long way around, it skips. We do have a little bit of blood coming back from the lungs because a little bit of blood went to the lungs, but not as much as we would have in the adult. And all of that blood now shortcutting it across to the left atrium, goes through the bicuspid or mitral valve, the semilunar valve, and now it enters into the aorta. First, the ascending portion or ascending aorta, and now it's going to pass these three structures we ended on last Tuesday. The brachiocephalic artery, the common carotid artery, and the left subclavian artery. And this is a chance for the blood, some of it, to go to the head and to the arm. So this takes care of the upper part of the body. That blood which is not diverted to the upper part of the body joins the blood from the ductus arteriosus and continues to the lower part of the body. So we have all these shortcuts. Most of the shortcuts are meant to avoid sending the blood in mass to the lungs. When the blood goes to the lower part of the body, it'll pass the kidneys. It's in the abdominal aorta, and the abdominal aorta splits into both legs. This is what's called, you'll learn later, common iliac artery. The common iliac artery divides into the external iliac artery, and in the background here, only in the back, the internal iliac artery, but there's an extra one now. This one here. This is the umbilical artery, one on each side. The umbilical arteries are said to have deoxygenated blood, or blood in need of oxygenation. I like that better. They go out through the belly button or umbilicus, join as a pair, and spiral downward to make the rest of the umbilical cord. These come down the umbilical arteries. Blood is exchanged at the capillary level, and now the umbilical vein takes it back. This picture that I have for you probably is the best one. There are several editions of the books that you can find it in, as I said, but the reason I like this one is it's got these boxes that show what happened or tell you what happens at birth. When you're born, you want the blood to go to the lungs. And when you're born, you don't want the placenta or the umbilical cord. You have no need for the umbilical arteries. You have no need for the umbilical vein. Okay, you're on your own. And at birth, what happens is that the ductus arteriosus, this one, collapses right at birth. Okay, and forever thereafter is scar tissue called the ligamentum arteriosum. That's over here. There's always that piece of scar tissue. All of us have it. The foramen ovale, the hole between the two atria, that's got to shut. That's got to shut so we can get normal circulation. It does shut, closes, and becomes the fossa ovalis. And that looks like scar tissue. Looking at the diagram again, I said that part could have been shown a little bit better, but the idea is clear. Okay, a hole on one side and a plug on the other, the fossa ovalis. The ductus venosus, which is bringing blood from the umbilical vein through the liver, collapses. Here it is here, completely collapsed. And then forever after, it's called the ligamentum venosum. The umbilical vein collapses as well. You need not know the ligamentum teres name for that one. 2, 3. Okay. The umbilical arteries also collapse. We'd expect that. Veins and arteries collapse because they're not going to be needed anymore. There are 4 things that really happen at birth. One, and it's not listed here, is the placenta and the umbilical cord are lost. The ductus venosus collapses and becomes the ligamentum venosum. The foramen ovale shuts and becomes the fossa ovalis. And the ductus arteriosus collapses and becomes the ligamentum arteriosum. That gives us this situation on the right, which could be the drawing of any adult heart. It's labeled newborn, but adult is what it refers to as well. If the foramen ovale, which does not close properly, and it's the only change at birth that happens in the heart. The rest of the things are all outside the heart. If the foramen ovale does not close completely or enough, you may have what's called a blue baby, okay, not getting enough oxygen. the opening is still there. That opening should close right at birth. If it doesn't, and it's very readily detectable, it may close in an hour or two. You can wait a while. You can wait a while, but if it hasn't closed it after a given length of time, then unfortunately you'll have to have a heart surgery on the newborn to close that. You and I should have closed foramen ovales, which are now fossa ovalis. But it's possible for some of us that we still have a pinhole. We still have a slight hole. Not enough to cause any alarm born or anything like that. And maybe if you're wondering why you can't run 100 meters as fast as somebody else, you might have one of those, but it's not important.
Is it common for that to happen or is it quite rare?
You know, I've read about it because it's one of the few things that interested me, and nobody will say. Nobody says how common or rare it actually is. Because see, obviously, it wasn't discovered at birth, and so now you have to wait for somebody to have a problem, and then you detect it. So you really can't tell how prevalent it is. It is there, we know that. Okay, let me close that. I will go over the ear again with you at another time. It's material for P3. We have plenty of time now. Okay. Not as much as you would have had, but we'll go over this material. I'm just reminding you because we have gone over it. Do you need to know the selected functions and structures of the brain, the eye? And I wanted to come down to the heart, because the heart is both in P3, but it's also going to be on L2, the first test. I gave you this list a couple of times, and it lists the structures that you'll be responsible for. We're going to name them again in a moment here. And I know you saw these pictures Tuesday, but you can't see them enough. You may think so, but I don't. Okay, here's the aorta. Sometimes it's called the aortic arch going across. Okay. Here are the three vessels coming off of the top of the aorta that go to the arm and to the head. The first is the brachiocephalic. The second is the common carotid. And the next one is the left subclavian. Okay, well, subclavian under the arm, under the collarbone, under the clavicle. Common carotid along the side of your neck. And the brachiocephalic, brachio meaning to the arm, that's this piece here, and cephalic, the part that's going upward, will become the carotid artery for the right side. ABCS, A, aorta, B, brachiocephalic, C, common carotid, S, subclavian. Here's the superior vena cava here, entering into this structure, unlabeled, but it's the auricle for the right atrium, or you could just call it the right atrium. And then the left ventricle is down here, but it's not open to show you yet. This is the pulmonary trunk, a pulmonary artery here, and pulmonary artery coming out the other side. Now it's open. Here's the right ventricle, entered through the tricuspid valve. Right atrium here, and the auricle here. The left atrium, the mitral valve, and the left ventricle. The IV septum is this structure right here. If you had to choose one word to describe the IV septum, it would be myocardium. Mitral valve again, chordae tendineae, to show better over here. On the tricuspid valve, the trabeculae carneae, the roughened walls of the ventricles allow for expansion of the ventricles rather than splitting of the chambers. On the she part, the left side is over here because it's larger, much larger. It has a papillary muscle in here in the left ventricle. There's going to be at least 2 papillary muscles because they attach to the bicuspid valve or mitral valve by way of the chordae tendineae. Here's the chordae tendineae. The tricuspid valve is smaller, often not very distinct, but this is fine. The little chordae tendineae down here, the right ventricle, between the ventricles, the IV septum, and the apex down here. Anything above the cusp of the mitral valve or the cusp of the tricuspid valve, any chamber up here or here will be atria. This is the right atrium and the left. Here's the bicuspid valve again. Now this left chamber got cut a little bit differently. You never know when you do make these cuts. This is attached to it. The chamber is not completely flat on the backside. It sort of humps over. This is trabeculae carneae, the roughened interior wall of the ventricle. This is a papillary muscle. We saw it from the front, now we're seeing it from the side. We know it's a papillary muscle because the chordae tendineae attached to it, and at the other end of the chordae tendineae is always a valve cusp, and this is the mitral valve. Here's the valve cusp, one of the 3 valve cusps for the aortic semilunar valve. We can't see the tricuspid in this cut. Can't see the tricuspid valve. I'm going to guess that this is the right ventricle over here. The tricuspid valve is usually higher. But in order to say it be absolutely certain, I have to see the tricuspid valve too. So I would have to show it to you. The myocardium is the muscular layer. The insides, all of the insides, all the valve cusps. This is endocardium. And the outside is the epicardium, also known as the visceral pericardium. Remember, the parietal pericardium, not shown here, is a looser sac. and between the parietal and the visceral pericardium is pericardial fluid to lubricate the heart. The sac is always taken off in order to see the insides here. Okay. I'm going to give you a 15-minute break. I know what I have left to do, and we can afford that. And maybe you guys want to discuss our topic earlier. That's up to you. Okay, so stop the share, and see you in 3:15. Okay. This must be a late lunch break for some of you. 7 or 8 of you came back eating. Can't tell what. Okay. Any questions, comments?
I had a question.
Yes.
So is it like set in stone that we're gonna have the lecture 2 exam on the 4th, or?
I've been thinking about it, and I was thinking of making 2 tests, but that won't work. If I make 2 tests, then I've got to get people to take the test outside of their normal time because I'm not cutting lectures. I can't do that. I can't cut the material. So it's not set in stone, but I need to have almost all of the class want to take it on the 2nd. It's not going anywhere else, that's for sure, because it would run right into P3, and P3 cannot be extended, postponed, as I told you before, because that will really put the crimp on the last material we get out just before Christmas, and there are a lot of testing done that we have to do. There'll be 3 tests in 2 days just before Christmas. So I'm not going to shortchange that material, no. The problem arose that we're talking about here because I set the test date originally, okay? And it seems that you guys gobble up the material a lot better or faster than most of my other classes. How can I tell? Well, one, you don't have many questions. That's not good, but you do great on the test. So that part sort of wipes out the other. So right now it's on the 4th, just like it says. Okay, but I will call you, ask you if you've how you feel. I'll ask you on Tuesday morning, or I'll ask you in an email to respond to me. Okay, and no response. If I do an email, if I get no response from you, well, put it wherever I want. Okay, for that person, but there can only be 1 test. It takes a long time to make up the test and to make them even and equal. I couldn't guarantee that they would be. 1 test would definitely be harder than the other. So, Adriel, is that how you say your name? Okay. Do you want to add anything or try to?
I just think because if we have like lecture 2 exam and then like following that is a practicum, it just seems like a lot to study kind of all at once. So
Well, I was suggesting that too, and it is a lot to study because, and only because, it's the same amount of material. It is not more to study, but it's a lot to study because people will put off studying for the L2 test until the last minute, and they'll shortcut P3. That's human nature. I've been doing this way too many years to have anybody tell me differently. I just that's just the way it is, and they're going to put themselves in a bind. And that I actually started by putting it on the 4th. Now I'm giving you an opportunity to get out of it, but don't want to, you don't want to, okay? And don't come crying later on, okay?
I have
So,
a quick question.
sure,
Can I set up a vote in the chat?
you can set up a vote right here. I'd like to see it too, though.
So then everyone can see everyone's response to it?
Oh, you don't want that? Is that it?
Because some people don't speak, if that makes sense. Like in the Zoom, so it would be nice to say yes or no in the chat.
Okay, I don't use chat much. I do read your chat. You've already done it.
I just posted to see if anyone wanted to participate.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Is anybody, would they participate that way? Would they participate by email to me? Blanket email, like when I asked you for your correct email address. Yeah, I got everybody. Okay. Okay, I'm seeing yeses. Hang on. Well, I see a lot more yeses than I saw yellow hands a while back. Uh, you're in your own little house. You're in your own little cubicle. Is the one person still in Cancun? Can't be reached. Nobody can hurt you. Okay, so I want to see the yeses as yellow hands. If you already put yes in the chat, I want you to put a yellow hand or something up there right now. The chat also called for you to say no if that's what you wanted. I don't see any. I don't know what's going on here. This no way to hold an election. So if you want the test on Tuesday, now Eric is indifferent wherever he is. Okay, thank you. Does it? Okay. Okay, would you take the yellow hands down then, please? Those that prefer to take the test on Thursday, put the yellow hand up. Harrison, you must not be here anymore. There,
I'm here.
okay, you had a hand up forever. Okay,
Sorry about that. I alerted it.
okay. Those that are not wanting to change the test date, want Thursday, come on and then put a yellow hand. I need to know how many. If you're indifferent, then don't vote at all. Okay. Is Maya gone? Or Maya?
Yes, Charlie. Right?
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah.
In the chat, you said now yes, you wanted to change.
Yes, I just checked out and I found the other class, the exam is from November 7 till 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the deal. I had a lot of people willing to wanting to change the test date. I think, I mean, what I think is it's very important to me, but not necessarily to you. I think that will help you. I really do think it will help take the stress off of P3. P3 is a pretty test. P3 has a lot of material though, and I'm going to show you some more today because we're not even finished with P3 material. We're going to still have that coming. Okay, I saw a lot of people wanting to take it on the Tuesday now. I saw nobody voting for Thursday, and that doesn't mean that some aren't indifferent, which means they can take it either place. So the test will be on Tuesday, the 2nd, okay? And I'll put out an email for that. If something comes up and you need and must take it on the Thursday, you'll need to contact me through email and convince me, because this was the time to do it. Okay, is that okay with you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. Okay, we were just there. That material was for P3, which is going to be the 9th. Okay, we're going to look at vessels. We're going to look at vessels on human models. We're going to look at vessels and name them on the cat from previously dissected cats. And I'm going to use a diagram to get us started. All of this material is for P3. We have a lot to do yet for practicum 3. So I'm actually glad you've given yourself a little bit more time for P3, whether you know it or not. These are the vessels above the diaphragm of a cat. Okay, the date's wrong, I see. Sorry about that. Okay. These are the veins that you would see. And we can always, of course, identify the heart. Below the heart and coming to it is the inferior vena cava. It comes from the lowermost part of the body. Here's the diaphragm separating abdomen and thorax. Here's the inferior vena cava, and here's the superior vena cava. The blood flows in the direction the arrow's moving right now. But it's very common when we look at a map to start with the biggest street go to the next biggest street, and keep going till you get to the smallest destination. So we may talk backwards, but it still always makes sense to everybody. Here's the superior vena cava. Okay. Now, right above the heart and behind it, we're looking at the ventral side of a cat. It's lying supine on its back. There's another vein called the azygos. I have lots and lots of pictures of these for you. Okay, the azygos brings blood from the back, from the spinal area, and it empties into the superior vena cava. The superior vena cava continues upward here until it splits and goes towards the right and left arms. But about halfway up, there's a vessel called the mammary. It's also called the internal thoracic, but most people are gravitating toward just calling it the mammary. You can't see the end of it or the beginning, but it's actually a Y shape. It's two vessels that come together, one from the right chest, one from the wall of the left chest, and the mammary then, as one vessel, enters into the superior vena cava. A vertebral is tricky. Most of this is not. The vertebral vein comes in from anywhere. It can attach here on the side or underneath the superior vena cava. It can instead attach here to this next vessel, the brachiocephalic that we're going to do. It can attach here, the other brachiocephalic, on this side or both sides of the vena cava. And sometimes we don't find it at all. Okay. That one you really got to be shown because it's movable in position. We have it on a piece of paper here, inked in, but that one could end up not being there at all or being in a different location. The vertebrals all come from the back, from the vertebrae, and empty blood into the superior vena cava or the brachiocephalix. Okay. When the superior vena cava split, it actually was being formed from these two vessels coming this way. These are the brachiocephalic. Brachiocephalic means arm and head. So let's follow this vessel going to the arm and to the head. Here's the part going to the arm, and the first part here is called the subclavian. The subclavian begins as soon as this vessel veers off. That vessel is the external jugular. So looking at it on the other side, here is the brachiocephalic. Here is the external jugular going up the side of the trachea. And then immediately after it is the subclavian. The subclavian continues until a vessel comes off of it, the subscapular, and it goes behind the scapula. Actually, it's coming from the scapula. We know it goes in this direction. After you pass the subscapular, all the rest is called brachial. The only vessel that we're doing anyway. So it's going to be superior vena cava, brachiocephalic, subclavian, branching at the subscapular and the brachial. The external jugular here goes up and makes a circuit. In some cats, this is really easy to see. I've got plenty of good pictures of this. Before it gets that far, though, the first vessel off bit is the transverse scapular. The transverse scapular goes over the scapula, transverse scapular, whereas the subscapular goes onto the other side. This goes to the dorsal side, this goes to the ventral side. This is a flat piece of paper, and so the drawing is flat. However, the transverse scapular actually dies downward along the side of the trachea to get to the scapula, which is on the back, of course. Again, we have to put everything together. Can't just look at a drawing. We need to look at photographs as well. Moving up, on the inner side is the internal jugular. Not visible on most cats, but when it is visible, it's very, very obvious. The internal jugular and the external jugular. The external jugular proceeds upward, crosses over at the transverse jugular, okay, and can proceed back down to the other side. This most lateral vein is the maxillary, going to the maxilla. And this a little bit more medial is the lingual, meaning tongue, facial. Okay. Now, in one going over, you couldn't possibly know much of anything yet, but going over this a couple of times will help out. If you're wondering how we can see this in a photograph, well, the cats are injected. They're injected usually right about here. And so this side gets ruined. They're injected with latex. The other side is always intact though. And the latex is colored blue and red. Blue stays on the venous side and the red stays on the arterial side. Here it is all in text. And here is a blank diagram that you can practice on if you print it out for yourself. The arteries above the diaphragm, here's the diaphragm again, come to the heart. And here's our aortic arch. You can barely see it. You really, too bad we don't get to do this for real. Some people say, no, it isn't too bad at all. Okay, here's the aortic arch. And as it arches over, it goes behind the heart, goes down, and becomes the abdominal aorta once it passes the diaphragm. Before it passes the diaphragm, the end of the aortic arch going down to the diaphragm is called the descending thoracic aorta. Now, in the human heart, the models that I've shown you, I've taught you the ABCS. And there were 3 vessels coming off the top of the aortic arch. This is a minor, but significant. Well, it's a significant enough difference in the cat. The cat only has 2 vessels coming off. It's obviously got to get blood everywhere. So there's going to have to be another alternative. Okay. The 2 vessels coming off, the first one is still the brachiocephalic. Okay, let's follow it up until it splits right here. This is the common carotid artery. And the common carotids come off the one brachiocephalic. the right and left common carotid arteries. They do not cross over, but they do continue on as maxillary and facial. Notice I didn't say lingual facial. It's facial artery, lingual facial vein. You're not responsible for this vessel since it's not labeled. It's the internal maxillary, but again, you're not responsible for that one. So we got the head pretty well taken care of quickly there. Once we pass the carotids right here, this small little piece is the subclavian. It was in the veins. We went from brachiocephalic to subclavian. And then over on this side, well, let's stick with this side. A vessel comes off, this one here. That's the same as this one. This is the transverse scapular. You remember the transverse scapular vein came off of the external jugular vein, came off from this way. But here it's coming off of the major arc that we have here. This is the transverse scapular. Once we've found the transverse scapular, we'll cut across and exit the main part of the body. We'll exit the thoracic cavity. We know we have exited it because we'll feel the ribs. They'll have to have been cut at that point, but we can find it. And the next part after the subclavian is something the cat doesn't really have. It's the axillary. The axillary. The axilla is your armpit. We talked about that with the scapula. Okay. Here's the axillary. And then the next vessel coming off is the subscapular again. Subscapular labeled on this side. And once we pass the subscapular, always, it's brachial. That takes care of the right side, at least once through. But what's the second vessel coming off? The second one is the left subclavian. What one's missing that humans have? The common carotid, because it's been shifted up to here in the cat. The cat still has two common carotids, just like we do. This was the brachiocephalic coming off the aortic arch. Here's the left subclavian. And now this is a long one until it reaches the mammary. This is a mammary. This is a mammary. The mammary arteries stick up like little fingers. Sometimes they look like pigtails, but they always point at you. We have two mammary arteries. One for the right chest, of course, one for the left. Go past it. This is labeled vertebral. Vertebrals can occur anywhere. So when this was made, I didn't make it. It's been around for 20 years. When this diagram was made, somebody wanted to try to be realistic and stick a vertebral in there. I find it more confusing for people when you're first starting out, but pretty soon you'll catch on very, very well. Okay, so here's the mammary. Here's the mammary. Go a little farther. Here's that transverse scapular. Here's the axillary on this side. Here's the subscapular. Here's the brachial, labeled over here though. Here it is in text. If you do take the time to read the text, you'll really understand it much better. And for your benefit then, here's a sheet to practice on. Okay. The palatability, that's the word, the niceness of the specimen anyway, depends on several things. Who did the dissection? How long ago did they do the dissection? And how well it got injected. This cat got injected very well. I don't like the coloration, but I think it's a really good learning tool. Here's the heart. Just doing veins now. Superior vena cava. It splits into two parts, brachiocephalic towards the back there, and this part here, this is also brachiocephalic. This is a small vertebral. And what doesn't show on this particular cat is the mammary vein, which should be right about here, but it's not there. We never get everything on one cat. Here's the brachiocephalic. If we go straight up here, the long root, this is the this is the external jugular. External jugular. A little farther up, here's the transverse scapular going downward, as I said it would. Here is the subclavian. And it's not clear where the subscapular comes off in this view. So I won't ask it from this view. I'll show it to you in just a second. Here's the internal jugular. It's a really nice one, actually. The brachial is down here. The brachial starts when the subscapular comes off, and we can't see the subscapular. It should be over here. So it's hidden behind this little mountain. But we know when we get this far down on the arm, it's brachial. So the only thing I haven't shown you on this one, besides the head vessels, is the subscapular. Okay. Superior vena cava, brachiocephalic, brachiocephalic. This is a vertebral. This little tiny excuse for a vessel is the mammary. So here we are back to brachiocephalic. This is the external jugular. This is the maxillary. This part here is the lingual facial. This is the transverse jugular. It's also called the transverse facial. Here is the transverse scapular. And here's a beautiful subscapular. Now, if we start at the transverse scapular and work our way back, go down the external jugular to this crotch, then this is the subclavian. The subscapular comes off of it, and the rest of it is the brachial. This one just has some, the same picture, but it has some different labels for you. It's labeled the vertebral this time. That's nice. Transverse scapular, subscapular, maxillary. This should be lingual facial. Transverse jugular here. Looking at the throat region, here is the external jugular on this side, external jugular over here, the maxillary here, and the lingual facial here. Again, whoever, I asked students to, as a sort of a bonus project years and years ago, to take pictures of their cats and give me what was the best that they got. And I accepted this one. I've always meant to change that to lingual facial, but on any test that we have, I will never put facial and lingual facial as choices for the same question. So you'll be able to see right through that. Okay, now the question is, where are we? This is the brachiocephalic. This is the brachiocephalic. This is not going anywhere, all chopped up, no good. The other side, okay. Brachiocephalic vein, internal jugular, external jugular. Here's the subclavian. This is going to be the subscapular going downward. The brachial continues on. I would never ask the brachial here because it's partially covered with something here. This is dipping into the arteries. We're not doing arteries today. Common carotid artery. They're easy to spot. Here's the other one on this side. This is beautiful actually down here. This is the subscapular vein and the subscapular artery. When you find one, you find the other. And you can actually put a probe under them and lift them both up at the same time. Then this would all be brachial afterwards. Okay, this one is the same, except it's properly labeled lingual facial here, external jugular, transverse jugular, and maxillary. This person probably needed a little bit more light on the subject, but once you take a look at it, you can figure it out. Here's the heart. This is the superior vena cava. Coming over this way is a brachiocephalic. Well, there must be a brachiocephalic on the other side too, and it's right here. We come across, here's the external jugular. This cat does not show an internal jugular. So here's the external jugular. Here is the transverse scapular. Here's the subclavian until we get to the subscapular. Now look how short this is. It was longer in the other cat, but every person or a cat's different. This is subclavian, and here comes off the subscapular. And then we have the brachial. Also notice that the external jugular is not running a straight line. It's curving and twisting. That happens all the time. Okay, on Tuesday, I'll do the vessels that are below the diaphragm. That'll be the first thing. I showed you the review terms. There are 2 practice quizzes for you that you haven't seen before. And if you haven't done any of them, you've got about 4 or 5 that are there for you to practice on. Okay, let me. Any questions? What you're seeing is that there's a lot more material yet for P3. And like I said, I'm happy that looks like you have opted into getting L2 out of the way a couple days earlier. But one good thing about P3, it's all pictures and you name it. Pictures and you name it. You're going to have to give some functions of the brain, and you're going to have to give some functions of parts of the fetal circulation. But it's not like name it, give the origin, give the insertion, give the action, and all of that. Okay, so there's very little to associate with the items, but there are many items. We're going to have many more. Okay, I like P3. I originally put it together myself when we worked together. One instructor is given the job of making test number 1. Somebody gets to test number 2, and I always take test number 3 because nobody wants it. It's the hardest one to set up. Now it's in pictures, so it's not going to be any harder to set up. But I got to set it up, and I think you're going to like it. Okay, so rather than ask a group, if you got any questions, just hang around and be the last ones out, and I will answer your questions. Okay. Otherwise, have a good weekend.
Thank you, Charlie.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Charlie?
Yeah.
I have a question. So L2, can you tell me what chapters it covers? It's 10, 23, 24, and 9, 19?
In 19, yes.
Okay, 4 chapters.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Have a good day, bye.